how companies have been, operating, executing, doing marketing, everything else. But in some cases, it's also important now to start really looking ahead and saying how are things really going to be moving ahead, and really focus on that a lot more. So there will be no conversations about how people are doing household chores along with work. We will also not get in terms of just everyone's kind of dressing up for the top and not necessarily for the bottom or any of those pieces over here. I think we're going to stay away from all those topics and kind of almost do a bit of crystal gazing, right? Kind of look at how things are really going to be going ahead. To kind of kick off, I think I'm going to put, while I don't normally do this, I think we'll do one question which kind of go across everybody else. If there had to be maybe 2 to 3 things, I think let's look at 3 things that each of you feel are going to be definite pieces of how we work moving ahead. What would those be? I'll start with you, Bhavna. Bhavna, you're on mute.
Sorry. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Varun. So from my side, I think the big change which I'm seeing and which people have started already chattering in the various groups you're a part of is this whole thing of whether the whole office piece will remain or will there be more focus towards working from home in the near future, because people are realizing the fact now that work can happen in when people are not sitting together. And sometimes actually, as we were talking, sorry, Byron, going back to a previous conversation, but there is more work happening. So what comes from there is the fact that would people remain being in the cities, or would they want to move away to more remote locations, more to the house in the hills or the house near the beach? And because you can anyways work remotely as well. So that as as marketeers, that would mean that maybe what we were currently focusing on, the typical metro kind of phenomena, that might start changing, and you might have pockets outside of the big cities where you will see people who are moving in. There could be like high net worth, medium net worth, whatever, but there will be a movement away from the city life. That's what I think is going to be one big thing, change, which we might see going forward. Again, it's crystal gazing, as we said. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but this is something which I feel is an important part.
Deepali, how about you? What do you feel is almost a prediction to go ahead?
So, I definitely want to say this, that if you want to see a office of the future, you should visit the IBM BKC office. We unveiled it 9 months back. And we actually reduced space by 25% because we did complete hot desking. But the app that we have to block the seats, the way we've done the meeting rooms with single use, 2 people and tons of meeting rooms, big boardrooms, it's a place meant for collaboration. It's a place which does not ask you where you live. And it doesn't mean, and it definitely says you don't need to come into work every day. So when the work from home thing happened, Varun, actually a lot of people, reached out to me who are friends who've not done Zoom and WebEx and Teams earlier. And they said, Deepali, you must give me like a one-on-one quickly, how to do team engagement, how to do the meetings, how to do the reviews, what are the things to be done. So I do think the way we did things at IBM, in terms of shifting gears very quickly, we have our worldwide chairman telling us that 95% of IBMers moved to working from home without a glitch within 24 to 48 hours across the world, right? So while I kind of agree that people will rethink where they live, how they live, and companies will rethink commercial spaces, but I do think collaboration is still key to working, and people will need a place to meet together, if not as often. And that it all can't be totally remote. But yes, the offices of the future will look different.
So basically, just places to meet and not necessarily have to come in every day to work.
Yes.
Is kind of.
Yes.
Virginia, how do you? Obviously, because in your prior role, you were almost like had a deeper view in terms of how workplaces worked, and now you moved on to a platform that I think you will have. I want to see what your insight is, because I think that will be interesting to kind of look at.
Well, the first thing is doing virtual onboarding has been interesting. So I think that you realize all the rituals of being a new person. How do you actually settle into a new job? I'm on day 12 of a new job. How do you do that? I think what you find is that it's not this abrupt day one thing. There's a lot of empathy around giving you information in bite sizes. You don't have like your 2-day onboarding, and you have bring your own device. So I think a lot of the things that were happening in pockets, like bring your own device, will just become the norm, right? And so a lot of that is, as I was reading sort of the non-disclosure agreements or use of personal device sort of legal things, there's a lot of trust that has to be built into the organization to have, people work remotely, yes, on the scheduling and doing their work, but also just confidential data, right? So that's going to be very interesting, which is how do you actually enforce that? I mean, I'm using my home devices for watching Netflix and doing work and doing Zoom, right? How does that play out? So security will be interesting, and how that evolves as we bring more and more people on board in a totally virtual environment from the onset. The second thing that I think, and once again, this is one of those things that is a long time coming, but is finally here, is that all marketing is digital marketing, right? So, and I have friends on the call here, we do love our events, don't we? And it kind of is that moment where you don't have a choice. You can't do events anymore. That was the place that we would go for success, comfort. Like if you put on a big show, it felt like you did something with your time. And I'm sure you guys are going through this with social sponsor. Like this was a big production to put on, but it's a very different type of experience. And so the big question is, if all marketing is digital marketing, how do people make that transformation when they don't have an option? And once you are able to do other types of, outdoor advertising or whatever, like, would you, or would you just keep doing what you're doing because now this is the new normal? And I think the third thing that I actually think is really good is just a lot of P&L transparency in the cost side as well as the revenue making side of businesses. So, in marketing, we would always talk about budgets. In sales, we would always talk about revenue. But I think now we're having a lot more candid conversations about P&Ls in the marketing department as well as the sales department. And so, that's good, right? So we're actually going to come out of this more as business leaders at all levels of the organization versus I'm in marketing, I'm just worried about consuming my budget. I'm in procurement, I'm focused on savings. I'm in sales, I just have to bring in the money, but I'll travel, 3 days a week and stay in 5-star hotels. You can see this sort of new sense of ownership in organizations because we have to be honest about our cost structure and our cash situation.
Yeah, I don't foresee anybody saying I'm going to take a flight to go somewhere for a 1-hour meeting anymore post this. I think those days are over for anyone to do. And I think
it'll go both ways, right? I think we never wanted to do it. And now clients are like, yeah, we'll just do it on Zoom. This started, by the way, in Bangalore. So Bangalore is leading on this. People did not want to commute in Bangalore for a while and say, don't spend 2 hours on the road to come visit me in Indranagar if you're on Outer Ring Road. So I think this is already happening because of congestion. I think it'll happen some more.
Kapil, how do you see how agencies function changing going ahead? I mean, I think in general, not just prediction of an agency, but in general.
No, but I think if there's one part positive outcome of this crisis is, we'd say probably COVID has been the chief transformation officer of everybody. If we were talking about being digital oriented, working from home, this has forced us, and the ease with which we've done this is fabulous. I think it's just shown us that there are no holy cows in ways of working. In fact, efficiency is increased. We had this obsession of wanting to meet, not just for client meetings, but for example, on pitches or consumer immersions, for example. Unless you go meet them there at their homes, you really won't get a fix to that. But I've done about 6 different brand consumer immersions in West Bengal, in Orissa, in Manipal during this last 40-45 days, and each has been richer than the other. In fact, I've been able to do more than what I was able to do before. So there is a sense of efficiency that's come into play. And the other big thing I'm seeing is because it's a time of hardship, I've seen that agencies have regained to some extent their position at the table as partners with clients. A lot of our conversations now are upstream. The CEOs who wouldn't necessarily talk to the agencies on a number of occasions are now involved on day-to-day basis on conversations on what to do. And conversations have moved beyond just advertising. It's how do we help transform? How do we communicate internally during this period? What are our opportunities going forward? So much more upstream conversations, which I hope will continue as we go out of this as well.
Harshil, you and I think we got into the entire business at a time when it was, I would say, we rode in through the digital wave in that sense. So, but there still has been a lot of changes that I think we can both agree that we've kind of seen. What do you see as almost like, if we're looking ahead, what are the changes that you kind of see happening in terms of how we function, just predictions in general? You're on mute here.
So I think everybody summed it up quite well. I agree with Dipali's point about the architecture of the office of the future, and that you kind of come in and plug in and out. I think that relationships are important, and I think that more people will meet to just build relationships than to do operational work. And I think that's already we're seeing that where there's strong relationships, operational work is moving smoothly. So I think from that standpoint that will remain. I also think that there was Bhavna who made the point about the fact that geography is not going to be a factor. And particularly, I think for our business, that makes a big difference. And I think for our clients' businesses also, because ultimately our overheads are charged to the client because we sit in the center of the city of Bombay or center of city of Bangalore or Gurgaon. So I think that is those factors will also come into play. But I'm just enjoying this process right now and trying to learn as much as I can, tune myself into it. To be honest, I know while we are wired to be digital, I have a confession to make that I was not so tuned to working, from this whole via video and everything. I did a small thing which really helped me. I moved from a small laptop to a big screen. So that has made a world of a difference, because suddenly I feel like, I can move my hands around. I can behave like I'm having a conversation with the person. So I think those behavioral nuances will also come in terms of how we aid our people to work. The other small point I had was that while I think everybody's talking, and particularly for the advertising agency industry, which, admittedly it pays a little lesser than all the other industries, I think still at this point in time. The one thing that I have noticed with some of my staff and some of my teammates who have been working from home, when I go on video call with them and I see the kind of environment that they're working in, it reinforces for me that I think still, even though, taking the point that Bhavna made about the fact that the office geography may not be in the center of the city, I think we'll have more remote hubs, but I think office environment makes a big difference. And I think, people running agencies are going to continue to invest in that.
One of my, if I had to add a prediction, and for me, the biggest change has been how we actually create stuff has really changed. And I see that changing further. I remember the first 2 weeks of we were trying to figure out how we're going to make any shoots happen. And Kapil and I have had these conversations where, separately, where the fact was how we shoot stuff, how we create stuff, how we use, let's say, animation. Like, we've started working with crews who are not even in India, and I see that and not even like larger scale ones. And I see that we really change. How we create stuff can be modular. It doesn't necessarily have to be 100 people in one location anymore to create. I think that, for me, that is the biggest change. It's going to be.
Yeah. And I think, Varun, also, to your point, very, 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 very important point, because I think for Indian agencies, we need to look at outside of India as a market for us, because we've been able to turn around and make these deliveries. And, I'm speaking to people in Southeast Asia and speaking to people in Africa who are saying that agility is not necessarily there. And we're suddenly seeing all of this agility in our processes. And, we've really got to look at this as an opportunity to open our business in a big way.
And I must just add, from a production perspective, I think there's lots of people is something that's unique to India. I mean, when I did the Zuzus back in 2009 in South Africa, the entire crew, including the actors, the director, set designer, consisted of 7 people.
Wow.
7 people. So I think it's something we will learn along the way.
Yeah, I think we have to learn that now. Dipali, especially if you focus on the technology side, as well as even in terms of the financial services side, how do you see not just how marketing happens, but in general how those as products kind of work? How do you see that changing going ahead?
So I will talk from 2 contexts, Varun. One is what is happening to our clients, which are large enterprises, because that'll give all of you the lay of the land. So essential services. One is financial services. The second is telecom. The 2 big ones. I think the first 6 weeks and 6 to 8 weeks, the focus has been in ensuring that the IT backbone works in all these organizations, and IBM really has been supporting there. But I think internally in those organizations, like you said, that the CEOs are talking to the agencies. Suddenly, the CIO is also a very important part of this whole equation inside that organization. He is the close confidant that the CEO in those organizations has, right? And the CIOs are running stream of what's happening now, coping with now, okay, coping with when we come out of COVID, which is the immediate future, and then everybody is also talking about reimagining their businesses for the future. And that's a different discussion altogether. So, when anything that we're looking at in terms of impact, there is the immediate impact when we come out of lockdown, and then there's going to be 2022. I think everybody should talk also about 2022, because that's not going to be similar to 2021.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening over here. Me personally, I think from a pure marketing perspective, I will go back to what Virginia said, that everything is digital, and we pivoted very quickly along with our agencies. And I must commend the agencies in the marketing services, world in terms of them pivoting so quickly, the opportunities, that we have. I'm running a virtual event today where we have 4,500 people logging in to discuss security issues. In a live event, we would never have 200. In a face-to-face event, we would never have more than 250, 300 people coming in to listen to security. So the context has changed, the content has changed, the narrative has changed, and I think that is something that I'm talking even to auto CMOs, automobile CMOs. I'm talking to the FMCG CMOs. Where they're saying that, listen, some of them are in food essentials and saying, do I need to put anything out? And we had a very interesting discussion with the HDFC Bank marketing team, who you guys would know have done that famous production with A.R. Rahman. They told us all the backstory of producing it. So the way things are getting done in the content space is changing. That's the second thing. And everything is moving digital from a marketing perspective. Yes. But whether that will stay in 2022 is a $1 million question in my head.
And in terms of financial services, how do you see that aspect? Because you've also been in that space.
So financial services, like I covered earlier, where I was, financial services today is, I think, ensuring that people get best serviced. People are, their concern is in ensuring that brands maintain their trust. You've got to trust the banks to ensure that everything works and that your data is secure. I think those are the two focus points. So like I said, I've spoken to HDFC Bank, a couple of other banks that we service.
Even in terms of marketing, you see that being the case? Yes. Okay.
Yes. And specifically talking to the marketing folks, their concern is that we need to tell our customers that everything is working and the data is secure. So trust and security are two main concerns that the marketing teams over there also have.
Bhavna, the FMCG sector has always functioned a certain. I know digital has come in and obviously brought D2C and everything else into it, the entire e-commerce part of it. But now, especially with I don't think we had this term called essentials before. Now we have two categories of all kinds of products. I mean, I was having this conversation with someone who's a laptop manufacturer, and they were saying laptops are essentials right now. But in a lot of ways, I think a large part of FMCG actually comes under essentials. So that changing and obviously moving ahead, how do you see that affecting the entire space itself?
So you're right, Varun. We really never thought, because we thought as FMCGs, we were always the essentials, right? And suddenly you wake up one day and you realize that maybe Tuyam, which is a product, is not an essential any longer. And it's the Atta Dal Chawal, which is more in the essential space. And then, of course, the clamor to get into the essential list and all of that.
Yeah.
So I think now, with the way the consumers are also changing, and yes, there has been a lot of focus on food in the current times, but a lot of people are also now really realizing that how much is it that you really need, right? So versus what you wanted. So a lot of changes actually started happening already, and if you see it in your peer group as well, as to how much is actually required and what is actually something like a want state kind of a thing. So now how it affects our marketing focus is that somewhere, especially for food items or even for personal care for that matter, how you actually ensure that in the consumer mindset you are essential, right? Because it also drives from the fact that what they perceive your products to be. So is a face cream essential for me? Maybe. Is it going to be an essential for the person who's coming to a household for working? I don't know, right? So again, need states differ. Again, the way people perceive things differ. So the FMCG space has to evolve itself into this whole gamut of figuring out where and what kind of need state are you going to be addressing.
Okay. But do you also then see the fact that even how, because of the amount of products you're kind of going to be sending out through e-com, and obviously this has been a surge not just from a standard e-commerce standpoint, but also even look at it from a groceries, etc. standpoint as well. So people are looking at products differently. You see subscription being a large part of how you will even push out marketing as well, pushing almost subscriptions of products themselves.
Right. So subscriptions is something which, as marketers, we feel that we will be able to get more people to, like a steady stream of people, which is there every month. However, enough and more researchers, and I think Dipali was already nodding when you asked him this question, was that, actually subscriptions don't really work. Your loyalty cards don't really work. And I'll refer back to one book, which is almost like a Bible, which is How Brands Grow. If you see all the data across brands, across the globe, these things are really, really a small part of any marketer's portfolio. Maybe magazines and stuff like that still enjoy a bit of subscription and loyalty. Yeah. But outside of that, medicines could be, because that you are pretty much focused on that. Yeah. Outside of that, I feel there is still some time before we, especially in India as a market, move on to it.
Okay.
So, Varun, I just want to say something. There is some data that I was reading, and so not IBM data, but external. 70% of the total data usage in India is on video now. Okay, and amongst the most search stuff, it's about how to and new brands. The experimentation with new brands is actually higher now during this period when I'm discovering alternatives to my normal stuff availability. So I'm not sure loyalty and subscription is a question just now that we ought to ask.
Okay. That's actually a nice way to look at it, because you're trying to find what can I get fastest is what you're looking at, not necessarily am I getting what I normally use, and that's totally fair in that sense.
And a lot of people are wanting to experiment with stuff right now, as Dipali said, because you're home, even if it goes bad, you still you have that time to get onto it. You don't have to go to work with a...
So Varun, imagine, just before this, we were talking about Roomba and Dyson.
Yes, correct. Okay? Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Virginia, content consumption obviously is one thing that's keeping, I think, a lot of us kind of going through this entire thing. Obviously, all our days are scheduled with work calls through the day, but what really keeps us going is to have a constant stream of stuff we can consume. And obviously, it's become a far larger part of how we even like connect and people having watch parties, etc. How do you see that space evolving? I mean, going ahead in terms of just like but how you create.
Yeah, so I think we've spoken a little bit about some other mediums. So let me talk a little bit about audio consumption during this time, specifically digital audio.
Yeah.
And, what's really interesting is audio is a companion medium, right? And so 79% of audio consumption happens when people are not looking at video, right? It's when video is not available to them. And it's also when you think about your day now, and we think about usage patterns. It used to be that our most popular time bands used to be commute time, right? You're driving and you're listening to music, or you're commuting and you're listening to music. Now people are listening to music when they're doing BJP, right? They have that playlist. And then you've got people that are doing cooking playlists. And then you've got people that are working out more. Actually, people are working out more at home than they used to, even when they're in routine, because we can see that from the fitness tracks and the playlist. So you're seeing more of that kind of music. And when you think about content consumption, interestingly, even though we have, 55 million tracks on the platform and 8,500 podcasts, people are going back to familiar music. So they're actually like 90s nostalgia is like massive, right? So yes, audio consumption went up during this period of time because, you have it more on all the time. So it used to be that you would spend, about 45 minutes a day with music going on in the background. That's now increased because it's just on in the house. Yeah. So it's become like social listening instead of social distancing, right? But coming back to it, what's interesting then is, how do we support new artists? Like if people are going back to the tried and true songs that we remember from college because it gives us a sense of normalcy, right? how do you actually make sure that, the artists that earn their living off of, producing new music and getting exposure and gigs, like they don't have anywhere to go.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're also trying to balance is like, it's great that we're seeing streaming of, our usual suspect tracks go up, but we've now started using Facebook Live to actually do, live concerts for some of our artist originals. There are about 75 artists that we support through artist originals. We pay them, we produce their music, etc. But we have to support the gig economy and the independent artists, right? So it's great that we liked our 90s mix, but so that's the other thing is like, we want to make sure that we continue exposing that. The one last thing I'll say, because it came up earlier about production and agencies, we are actually, producing audio tracks you can do in an environment like this or anytime, right? So you saw the backlash about those generic, videos about, piano music and drone shots of like empty streets. And it's almost become a joke about like COVID videos, right? COVID advertising is sort of, we're here for you in unprecedented times. The thing about audio is that you actually don't have to worry about the shoots, but, digital streaming is, a 15-second spot that is in between your music, and people seem to accept it a lot more.
Yeah.
Because it's companion. You're going to continue to, wash the dishes while you're listening. So I'll be interested to see how much agencies build creativity into audio, right? Because you can actually A/B test a lot more, because you can actually, for the same third of the budget, have many more different spots to try. And it's digital, right? So you can pull it off and say, hey, we want to switch this and see how it performs. So I'm curious to see, like, audio's always been in this purgatory of radio and video, right? But in an environment where you can't go out to shoots, like, will we see great audio creative, smart audio creative? I'm curious. And I guess that's a challenge to the agency community to say, like, do great audio. Like, it's going to really put you.
And if I was to just add to it, sorry, I'm coming from the advertiser and media side. I think earlier audio was just limited to that 15 or 30-second radio spot. And now the in-home consumption, which we've seen of the audio streaming, which has gone up so much. So I completely agree with Virginia that that's where the creativity now needs to come in. And it's outside of the podcast, outside of the traditional music, which is there. But what else can we do around that platform is something which is going to be an interesting thing in the future.
Yeah. I want to give two examples. I think Dipali mentioned the HDFC A.R. Rahman collaboration, right? Beautifully done. And to be able to produce that, and the brand integration with it was wonderful. We had exclusive rights to that track. It was extremely well received, right? But then you also look at, the kind of, there's a new podcast called Raising Parents, which is really interesting because you were talking about products that people use and how that's changed. You've got some of the podcasts that talk about, what are you watching on Netflix, right? And so people are actually talking about their stuff, and so they're feeling connected, and a sense of normalcy comes there. And so the fact that we have, an everyday brand, like a cosmetic brand for like a mom who's dealing with 50 things right now in lockdown, is not worried about her hair. She's worried about like washing her face. So like face wash right now is like an interesting kind of brand placement in like Raising Parents, right? Wash your face. So I think it'll be interesting. I'm new to B2C. I'm hoping to learn a lot from the ecosystem, but I'm really, it's fascinating to watch this from this side of the house at a time like this. Very different for me.
Varun, I'm going to add here, and to the point that Virginia is making on interesting audio, I think the way you guys are doing videos is also a little different. You are shaping the scripts to ensure that you can get the shoot done. The scripts are being written and thought out differently. So the agencies are rethinking creative. We just did a video with the top leadership team in IBM, which we could have never thought before, right? So 7 leadership team members actually played out in a video on the National Technology Day. So that's one point. And second, to Virginia and Bhavna, what they're saying, I think if you were to just get into the WhatsApp groups that the housewives have these days, and the brands that they're discussing and the food choices and what they're concerned about, you'll be amazed. For example, the stationery group in my building is the most active and what's getting ordered over there, right? So very, very interesting insights into how people are making choices these days, when they have limited resources and limited availability. Very interesting to just go on the sideline and watch how people are making choices.
Kapil, you earlier said that you've been doing a lot of immersions straight from home now without having to go to all these places. What are you seeing about the consumer that's kind of changing and going ahead? How do you see has there been a shift in terms of how it used to be earlier in terms of now? How do you see that changing?
I think there is, first of all, a realization all across that this is a problem that's here to stay for some time. The degrees of conversation may be different in urban centers and perhaps in smaller towns in Bihar and Orissa, but everyone is impacted and it's clear. So we were speaking a little earlier about essential products and services. So one of the things is that each consumer cohort is redefining what their definition of essential is. Now, it's the best place for a marketer to be in that space. So, but it's also really, really challenging because at this point in time, you're going back to saving, you're downgrading slightly. I'm talking about extended markets, not just affluence. You're going back to brands you trust more than anything else. So to bring yourself to the fore to say, look at me, I have a role to play in your life, is going to be that much more tougher. They are going to be more prudent about monies they are spending. They already are. So that's also a reality we need to look at. So whether it's formats, whether it's delivery mediums, whether it is sub-brands, what conversations we need to have to give them stripped down value is another space that we need to look at.
Okay. Harshal, you've actually, we've spoken in the past and you always have this focus in terms of how you kind of look at data and the analysis of it and really being able to put creative out there. While we're going to go deeper in this, and everybody's now like we've been talking, how everyone's going towards digital now. In that sense, everything is digital and has been moving there. I think just been pushed faster now. How do you see that part of it evolving as well in terms of how you, especially with proof and analytics and all that stuff you're doing?
So I think two things. I think most of the work that we've done with brands who are in. I mean, let's look at two kinds of brands, right? One set of brands which are very heavily dependent on investment in marketing to grow. So typically CPG is a category which is very heavily dependent on investment in marketing to grow. I think while digital will gain a share of audience, one must also remember that TV consumption has also gone through the roof. There are great TV deals available. I think really it depends on, what is there, what the brand is doing per se. Is the brand available? If the brand is available, I think you see brands that are available right now, they're doubling down on their marketing spends and they're really, going aggressively and chasing growth and they're achieving growth. So you've already seen Reckitt Benckiser overtake Unilever as the largest spender and, they've seen phenomenal growth. So I think from that standpoint, you will see brands that are available at this point in time. Look at multiple media. They're not going to look at just digital. They're going to look at television. They're going to look at great deals because, demand is reduced from advertisers in that sense and supply is in glut. So I think that's what they're going to do. I think the advertisers who are not so dependent on advertising, they're possibly going to take a step back and then say, let's make more prudent choices about which advertising spends actually determine sale. I think, one of the comments which were also about the fact that marketing and sales are now working together, I think that's great for marketing because suddenly you force this whole statistical aspect of marketing to come into the into the boardroom and really evaluate marketing spends not just from the GRP and the impression but also from the statistical impact to sale. So I think a lot of that work is going to find its way into the boardroom. It's already found its way into the boardroom, but I think with the coming in of automation and with the coming in of faster cuts delivered, I think you will see more of that being discussed in the boardrooms. And I think depending on where the company is in terms of their availability, in terms of their distribution, in terms of their geography, and also their elasticity to advertising, I think all of those factors will play in terms of determining how spends are kind of played out.
There's actually been some interesting questions coming in from people watching as well. I think there's been a lot of people asking how do we see rural marketing kind of changing also, because a lot of people have kind of gone back to their villages now. So obviously there are people who obviously were, I don't know if I don't like the word migrant workers, but I would say people who kind of gone back to their villages as workers. And I think, and obviously that dynamic's going to change. And also with the whole commerce part, e-com part kind of scaling up as well. So there is a dynamic. So will that change how we market in terms of rural? I'm opening up to anyone who has a point of view on that in terms of how do we see rural marketing changing?
Okay, if I just go for it, I'm looking at us emerging from this at three very, very broad cohorts. One is the affluent urban cohort, which will be willing to pay a little more for more trust, more quality, more nutrition, stuff like that. There will be the middle India cohort, which will look at prudence, which will look at perhaps some amount of traditional, even nationalism, emotion to kind of determine their purchase behavior. And then there will be the disenchanted, which will see perhaps it's a sustenance conversation for them. So you will probably see stripped down value. You probably will see us a lot of growth coming from unbranded and loose as a segment as well. That's a set I would see happening across the three. It's unfair to plot it into just three, but these are three really broad segments.
So if I were to add to what Kapil said, and this is going to my past experience of Reckitt, where we used to do a lot of rural marketing. So it's the smaller pack size and the, it's literally like we had a 30 rupee Dettol hand wash versus the typical 85, 90 rupee product which was available. And those kind of things do well, because what we should realize is that the person who's moved away from the cities already experienced these brands here. So it's not that they're not aware of the brands, it's or the benefits of the brand. So going further, they want the same thing. Maybe the affordability and the availability becomes more important. And that's the reason why even like large scale FMCG brands will have to expand the distribution. Again, earlier it used to be difficult to get into the sub-Ds and the rural areas, but they're now with a large part of population, as of now at least, moving there, the organizations need to understand how they will address the availability in those places, right? Again, with the TV footprint also going much higher now, the digital footprint much higher, because Doordarshan has again come back in like how now with the whole programming. So there is a consumer who's lying there. They're just waiting for the right products to be available to them at the right price.
Yeah, there is one more. Sorry,
just a couple of points over there, because this is something I've been studying. When we look at the overall Jio subscriber base, right, which is over 300 million, 370 or so, and a subset of that, what's very interesting is, if you look at handsets, right, as a proxy for rural marketing, we're getting some really interesting things from categories like Alcobev, where you would previously not really see those brands marketing other than outdoors, so some of the Desi Darus and whatnot, right? But the reality is that you're going to actually see a lot more surrogate, so tier one advertising by Desi brands, right? And so it's going to be interesting. You'll start seeing Desi playlists, right, from an Indian brand trying to reach certain states. And because of the flexibility of with more digital, when lockdowns open or close, shops are open or closed, stock opens or closed, their ability to kind of switch on and off their digital channels to say, okay, Calcutta's open, so we'll go live there versus this is happening. The agility that a lot of these brands are going to, because they're new to digital to begin with, right? So they're generally skittish. So they're going to want to actually come to digital for that agility. But then the other thing about it is also the language, right? Our Hindi language and vernacular language ads, we don't get that many of them. You'd be surprised. But the ones that we do get always do well. So with rural, it's a requirement. You have to do vernacular. Our second and third largest language from music perspective is Telugu and Tamil, right? When was the last time you actually saw advertising, ad units done in Telugu and Tamil? And it's right after Hindi. So I think we're going to have to, we'll see what happens. But that's interesting from my point of view.
Deepali, you have a perspective on where you see that part of marketing kind of moving as well?
Just repeat that, Varun. What part of marketing you?
Rural marketing in that sense.
Okay. So, Varun, I have a slightly contrarian view. I think it is to do with the economy. If the economy cannot sustain rural jobs and cannot provide them with employment in rural India, the people who moved homes for a temporary situation will come back. Okay. So therefore, I always say, whenever people are talking to me with this whole overhang of what will happen 6 months from now, and I'll say, think 2022, because I don't think that the economy will be able to pivot so quickly to be able to provide them with employment opportunities in rural India. That's my personal point of view, but I think contrarian.
I mean, that also makes sense considering how manufacturing has kind of been happening over the time. You will need a lot of, I think that's been one big hit in terms of just manufacturing workers not really being available in that sense. As we move towards winding up, I want to sorry.
The other point is also that if you see the practical reality of, how salaries are being disbursed at this point in time for non-contracted staff, if you may, a lot of who have gone home. I've spoken to tons of business owners who basically cut down salaries to 25%. They're saying send them $5,000, send them $7,000 because that ensures sustainability and business is just down to zero. So I think, a lot of that income which they earned in the city and sent back home was also driving rural consumption. So I think, those things. So I agree with the point that Kapil spoke about, which is the smaller pack and, focus on value. And I think that's the brands that do that well and focus on availability and value will really see themselves rise in rural India.
As we kind of winding up, I thought we'll end with something which I think we can just call opportunities. While we've all spoken about a lot of stuff, which is what are the opportunities going ahead, which many times we don't end up talking about. What is the big opportunity as brands, as marketers, as platforms, as agencies? I mean, it can be anything, even as consumers, actually. I'm going to put that in there. What are the big opportunities in front of us? Because I started with one order, I'm going to start with Harshil on this one. So Harshil, you can go first.
Yeah, I think I said at the start, and I'm a very firm believer that the opportunity for the agency business is only two: reduce the overhead and provide better value to customers. And second is that India is not our only market.
That's actually, India is not our only market, something I totally agree with you. I think that's really the way things will be.
Yeah.
Kapil, how about you?
Actually, I'll second what Harshil is saying. The first big opportunity is agency anyway. It doesn't matter where you are, how you are, whether you have an office or not. You can service just about anyone on that one. The second big opportunity I see for us, and not from a business perspective, I just think from a talent perspective, as a result of agency anyway, we have the opportunity opening up our minds to talent from other cities, not depend on people to come to Bombay and Delhi and then have only that limited talent pool to talk to. I think this period has opened our horizon to a much larger talent pool, which I'm very excited about.
Perfect. Virginia?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is really around leadership and leadership at all levels. For many folks on the call, this is their first downturn. For some of us, this is our third. And what you'll see is, this is a great time for you to take a leadership role in your company and sort of lean in versus lean back and hope something happens, because especially in a virtual environment, you can't depend on one leader to inspire everybody to do their best. And you have to check in on each other. You have to have more shared leadership. And I think that's great experience. If you're a fresher, somebody asks the question, what should we be thinking about if this is our first job? Nobody's going to question if you want to do more, if you want to take on more responsibility, if you have great ideas. When times are good, nobody wants to listen to the young people, right? Like, we're just going to tell you what to do because we don't want you to break anything. Now we're like, tell us what's there. So you have an audience in the leadership right now, and this is your time to show. And I think I would really, whenever you're looking for your next job, whether it be 2022 or whatever, everybody's going to ask you the question, where were you and what did you do during this time? So if you let things happen to you, don't let that be your story. That would be my big opportunity.
That's actually a good way to look at it. Yeah, perfect. Dipal?
Okay. So I run two messages here. One is, I think both advertising agencies and marketers need to relook at segmentation variables. I think the traditional way of looking at 25 to 45 women earning so much, etc., needs to undergo a change. I think, for example, I'm ready for somebody who comes and sells me a remodeled kitchen today. Okay, because I have operated in the kitchen and I know what I like and what I want. An area that I ignored for the last 20 years, an area that I did not go into for the last 20 years. So you look at working women and you'll be able to sell them kitchens, right? And that I'm giving that as an example to say, look at segmentation differently now. Okay, don't look at the same variable. So that's my one message to the marketers and advertisers. But as far as brands are concerned, I'm leaving a message of 3 A's. Okay, authenticity, agility, and ability. Okay, so be authentic, be present during COVID, post-COVID, tell people what you're going through as a brand. I think communication is very important there. So that's the authentic part of the brand. Agility, pivot very quickly. Whether you need to pivot to providing a different service, you need to provide different packaging, you need to go to a different channel, whether for communication or for distribution, I think agility is going to be key. Third is ability. Have ability now and build ability for future. Whether that ability is in technology, in manufacturing, in supply chain, in using data, in AI, but build ability. So those are my 3 messages: authenticity, agility, and ability.
Perfect. Bhavna,
Okay.
where you think opportunity lies?
Okay, so going to last, and most of what you wanted to say has already been covered, and it's a tough act to follow after the Pali. But what I really think, and again, going back to what I started off saying, that we feel like now, obviously, the consumers are going to be everywhere. There will be, again, nobody's used this. I'm surprised, the new normal, the much bastardized.
You stayed away from that word for 45 minutes. I think it's a record on a panel.
Yeah, exactly. So nobody knows how things will change. But yeah, you do see significant shifts in how people are evaluating their priorities. So will automobiles come in? Will luxury automobiles stay, or will people go into the smaller automobiles because you still want to have your privacy while traveling? Again, do I want to invest in a dishwasher at home? Do I still want my maid to come in? Is she going to be there, or has she migrated back to the village and decided that she doesn't want to come here any longer? So those kind of things will change. And again, I'm talking as a consumer, I'm talking as a marketer, as a media person. We have to be much more open to the changing dynamics which are there today. What nobody knew, that Ramayana is going to beat Game of Thrones hands down, right? Nobody could have predicted it. We've all grown up with it. Nobody remembers. And strangely, if you've seen those BARC reports which are coming out, it is SECA, it is the younger age group, like the less than 15 years, or rather the 15 to 25 and the 40 plus years who are watching it. So again, content is going to be very important, be it audio, what Virginia spoke about, be it the different videos, all those kind of TikToks which are now floating around all our WhatsApp groups. So the consumer is changing, the marketer is changing. People want entertainment. They want their mind to be away from the things which are happening right now. There is just too much of negativity around. So how are we actually wanting to build on that positivity as marketers as well? I think that's what's important. And I think what some of us, again, something which I feel a lot of brands would now start doing is the whole cause-related marketing, because right now, in the times we are, that is an opportunity which kind of makes you sure that you are closer to the consumers where they want to be. So yeah, that's from me.
So I have one opportunity which I'm sticking to, and I'm going to stick to that for at least the next year and a half to 2 years. Is that I think the biggest opportunity is that what can you actually give people in their homes? Because I think we've all rediscovered how what all we can do in our own homes, which I think we will always run out to eat somewhere, go out to meet friends. I think we've rediscovered a lot of what we can actually do in our house. So anybody who's going to make any form of kit, like I started a second podcast in the middle of lockdown, and it's been the easiest thing to start and keep going out there. From kits like that to stuff you can make at home, be it food, be it anything else. Someone told me there's a birthday kit you can actually get if a kid needs to have a birthday party at home. You can just order it and they're delivering it, right? So I think that's, for me, that's one big opportunity. What can we do at home? Because I know we'll all run out once we can, but I think we're still going to look at the home a little differently. So I think that's my cue to kind of wind this up. Thank you, everyone. I think we've we've given, I think, insights from all sides, and we stuck for 45 minutes before, Bhavna, you broke the thing and said new normal. You said so. I didn't. So I think that's how we're going to end this today.
Okay.
Thank you. So
I'll end with the purest greeting. Namaste.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, we can all close at namaste now.
Thank you very much.
You know,
Thank you.
instead of handshaking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.